you didn't want to be labeled a quitter growing up. Like, you didn't want to, you, you didn't, there was none of this fail fast type of talk when I was growing up.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. I'm here today with Erich Schlieper of Choose Movement Consulting. You guys are up in, where are you guys at? You're in
We're in St. Paul.
St. Paul, Minneapolis. So Minneapolis, St. Paul. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So I know Will runs that, right? Is Will the
Yeah.
head of that?
Will
Yeah.
Will founded the company about 10 years ago, and
Okay.
actually the way that I got over here was that I had hired him to come and help me. He was a one man shop
Okay.
for a while, and I hired him to come help me at a company that I was working at. We needed some extra help, and so he came over, and then we got to know each other. So at some point when I left that company, I told him that if he ever had a project that was bigger than he could handle, that I'd be happy to help him out, do some nights and weekends work, because I was working corporate and really kind of I had done systems integrator, LabVIEW, what do you call it? Partner before. I've been a part of a small partner before, and I liked the lifestyle. I liked the variety of projects, and so I told him if he ever had a project, let me know. I'd be happy to help. So one of those came up, and I did nights and weekends for a while, and then I had the corporate job I was working at let me go down to 4 days a week, so I could work one day with Will and do 4 days there. And so that I did that for like a year, and then we just had enough work going on that Will finally said, you just got to come full time. And then we've been growing ever since. I think this summer, because we had a couple of interns, we were up to about 10 people, and now we're back down to like 8-ish.
Okay. So the work came first and then you hired more people. Is that
Yes, and
okay?
that's kind of like, we end up everybody gets a little bit overloaded, and then finally get to the point where you're like, oh, we couldn't possibly take any more work, and somebody comes and says, hey, I got a job for you. So then it's like, oh, we better find somebody and
Yeah, that's something I
do that.
struggle with because I would like to hire people, but having steady work is always the problem. At
Yeah.
least for me. I don't know. Maybe you guys have better luck up there.
Well, I mean, we've managed. We've been lucky because we uh, kind of fell into, not really fell, but by word of mouth, we just kind of got different, uh, some different clients that have come back, and then they come back and they're like, oh, we've got more work and more work and more work. And especially in those corporate environments where they've got a ton of work to do, but they try to run lean. They
Hmm.
almost always seem to have money to outsource, uh, but almost never have enough. Like, don't want to hire people, because that means that then that shows up different on their books or whatever. And so
Hmm.
that's how they want to.
Yeah, well, good for you guys, though. That's good.
Yeah, and so far we've been mostly just able to stay in the Twin Cities, but I suspect as we grow there, if we want to grow further, there'll be a limit to how much we can do in the cities, and we'll have to start expanding, to the surrounding states, and hopefully to sites of current customers that are out of state, so that we still have, talk to current customers and can do some work there, and then go on site at the other places when necessary.
Yeah, well, that's good. You already have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
So that helps. Yeah, so do you do a lot of stuff on site, or you guys work remotely, or how does that play out?
It kind of depends. So we uh, we're willing and able to do both, which is why, staying in the Twin Cities is kind of nice. So like, I usually spend a day or two on site at clients a week, and then the rest of the time is in the office.
Ah, cool. Yeah, I've been on site like only a handful of times in the past couple of years. So
Ah, yeah. Well, and I don't know what your experience is, but we end up doing a lot of things where the hardware is all on site. And so if you're gonna, really test that you've implemented something correctly, you got to be there with the hardware. And so, it's usually big. The hardware is big enough for a system that they don't want to ship it to you or risk getting it damaged in transit or whatever. And so it's helpful to be on site to do those things.
yeah, I don't know. I end up picking up a lot of rescue jobs, and so they already have the hardware and they're already talking to it. So like it's one of those things where it's like the I feel like a lot of the risk in hardware is talking to it the first time and just getting it to do what you want. And so a lot of that risk is gone. Sometimes it's like weird hardware interactions, right? Like if you're moving a motor around or something and something gets in the way or things like that, maybe you need to, or weird hardware interactions might be worth debugging. But
Yeah.
once you have the driver that talks to the hardware, then it's just a matter of like sequencing things correctly. And
Well, and that's one of the things that you know, in a perfect world, we'd love to write, a lot of simulators for that.
Mhm.
That's one of the benefit of NI hardware is that some of them are cheesy, just analog, just a sine wave, kind of
Mhm.
example. But if if you can simulate the hardware, then you can at least get the starting and the stopping and
Yeah.
collecting the data and all that correct. And so if someone has a solution that's entirely NI, then it's easier to do that
Yeah.
remotely. Do most of the programming, then you go on site to do a little bit of integration.
Yeah, also too, a lot of the things I've been doing lately tend to be just more or less glorified data loggers. So there's not a lot of control stuff going on. Because I imagine control stuff you'd be a little bit more concerned. But just like reading waveforms and logging data, like, simulating that's pretty easy.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the stuff that we do, like if it's a rescue or something, often then also comes with, oh, but we want to change these things. And so sitting and talking with an engineer or
Yeah.
a technician and really walking through, how do you want this to work? What do you want it, right? Those interactions are really invaluable when trying to make changes so that you can leave it better than you found it.
Yeah, there is actually a lot to be said for walking around and watching the people use it, because oftentimes that's part of the thing that I miss when I'm remote. Like I don't actually get to see them interact with it. Sometimes they can share their screen and show me what they're doing, and that makes it a little bit better. But yeah, definitely just like staying there and watching and observing gets you a lot of useful information.
Yeah, it's also helpful from a continued business standpoint to be on site because if you're on site and they see you, sometimes it jogs somebody's mind, some other department or somebody else who's like, oh yeah, I need help on a project. Let me go talk to those guys instead of nobody not ever bringing it up or talking to anybody. So that has helped us in the past being on
That
site.
is actually really interesting. Maybe that's something I'm missing out on because yeah, I try to have like very frequent status meetings and stuff. So like I stay in front of the customer, but I don't meet all the other random people who happen to be walking by and seeing what's going on. And definitely when I worked at Westinghouse, I got a lot of work uh doing that. So I was like basically like internal contractor and I would show up on site and do stuff, but people would see me doing stuff and they'd be like, "Oh, I bet he can help out over here." And I would get drug into a lot of projects that way. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's not primarily what happens to us. I don't think, but it certainly helps, right? I mean, if you've got another manager who knows that we're doing work and then happens to see us, then he can be like, oh, hey, we want to talk to you about this other project. But the more remote we stay, the easier it is for whoever's working with us to just like, we'll just get the thing done and then be done and nobody's the wiser, which
yeah,
is a good thing, but it also doesn't help the organization as a whole to be more successful trying to get things done when they have a resource constraint.
yeah, maybe I need to figure out how to do more on-site visits. Sounds like a plan. So I'm curious, in the pre-interview or whatever before we talked before we sat down for this, You had mentioned you saw my presentation in Darren's at GDevCon, and that kind of sparked some ideas. And I was curious if you wanted to talk about that.
Uh, yeah, so when I uh, when I first started um, programming, a million years ago, it was I didn't. I came from an electrical engineering background, not a computer science. In fact, if you had told me when I was in school that I was going to be doing programming primarily as a job, I would not have believed you because I did not like C++ or like any of that stuff. Like, fortunately, I had a roommate who was like a wizard at C and C++. So when I had those classes, I was able to work with him and kind of get what we needed. But um, so I kind of picked it up and as I went, uh, kind of picked up a little bit of style, but I don't know that I was terribly great. And then I got a job when my wife and I moved to back to the Minnesota area. I got a job at Honeywell, and well, sorry, I did get a job at Honeywell, but soon after that, I got contacted by Guidance, which is now Boston Scientific, and medical device company. And I was like, oh, great. So I went and took a job there. And when I was there, they had a very kind of, I would say that's where I developed my style because they had a style and then they had also um, coding standards. And it was like, there's a lot of, at least when I was there, I think they've probably relaxed them since. But when I was there, like there was a lot of things that were musts in this coding standard, and so you had to do a lot of a lot of things, and then which kind of just led to having a very strict way that I went about formatting things, and so I have well now still to some extent, but previously I was like a monster about like straight wires and one pixel bends would just annoy me, and so I've spent a lot of time straightening wires.
Yeah, I don't know. I went through a phase of that, and then at some point I spent like I got this like giant VI, and I just spent like 2 hours moving wires around pixel bends, and I was just like, this is annoying. Like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, and I also like I think sometimes that gets in the way of actually getting good programming done, right? Like you don't spend as much time thinking about uh, the implementation as you do about oh I got to make sure that this looks good. Now I'm still in the camp of I want it to look good because especially if clients are going to see it, like you kind of want them to be able to look at it, have it look nice. But I also understand that there's a the amount of effort that it takes to do that is sometimes more than you really want the client to have to pay for, right? And so trying to get a little bit more relaxed in my approach to programming, and then especially with your blue formatter, I want to I want to get to the point of trying to use that or get to the point of seeing some things so that I can stop trying to straight wires and let a program do that as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
And I know I'm making progress because I can write test VIs that don't have straight wires and that have things all crazy. Because I used to like even on test, if I was writing a test VI that I was going to like save and just like use occasionally, and no one was ever going to see it, I would still make that look pretty. And I'm at kind of at that trying to be more of the like let's not get super crazy, but make the main code look good and be very readable. Um, and then anytime I go into somebody else's code, I try to leave it as much as possible, but I definitely clean some things up to make it easier for me and anybody coming after me reading it.
Yeah, actually, right before this, I was working on some code, and there was something that bothered me, and I put up with it for a while, and finally, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna change that. It was something little, but it was just like this is grating on me. Like, yeah, there's definitely some of that. I'm curious, do you find your views change more as you got into more of like the business world of like, managing people and budgets more? Does that Does that change your view a little bit or not really?
Um, I don't think it changes my view a lot. Um, Certainly a little, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to be as as good with the customers,
Yeah.
like being a good steward of the customer's resources, right? But I don't know, like I I find that I like to collect a lot of ideas from other people, and I try to be as open as possible to listening to what other people have to say, and which is sometimes good, and sometimes you get things and you're like, I don't know about that, but I
Yeah.
really do try and just be as open as possible because sometimes like I find that I learn a lot more if I do that than if I try to just adhere to my to being right all the time or to enforcing my way of doing things on others.
I don't know. I like that idea. At the same time, I feel like there's a lot of different voices out there and a lot of them conflict. And so if you try to listen to all of them, it's like, which way do I go? I feel like at some point you kind of have to put a stake in the ground and say, I'm kind of going this direction. No?
Well, absolutely, right? Like we have a way that we like to program choose movement, right? Like we've kind
Mhm.
of got the standards that we use, and which is because Will and I were the first ones here, right? It's largely based on what Will and I like to do.
Yeah.
Kind of what we think is good code, and so everybody else kind of has to go to that. But I guess what I was trying to say is that like I'm open to listening to people, and then I'm not just going to take what they say and just try it, right? But I'm open to trying new things and like
Mhm.
just see what happens from it, right? Like, I think 5 years ago, if you tried to talk me into pair or mob programming, I'd have been like, it seems like counterproductive, right? Like you're going to take twice the resources and to do one times the work. But after the couple of experiences that I've had with you and just kind of seeing what I think are some of the benefits, like I'm open to it. And so I'm looking for opportunities to apply the things that I've learned.
Mhm.
And, right. So that's really what I'm trying to say is that like I'm open, with software ideas,
Yeah.
whatever people are saying. And like, what are things that I can, when I have an opportunity, then to apply something, then I think about, is this a good place to apply that? Do I want to apply that? Right? Test it out, you know, do a little experiment, test it out, see if it's something that makes sense to me, and then, either incorporate it or drop it back off the pile. But, just kind of like to collect those different ideas so that when it comes to an implementation, I've got the the ideas that I can apply. Right? This other podcast that I listen to, All It Takes Is a Goal, John Acuff. He doesn't he he's a writer, and he talks about that you don't have writer's block, you have a deficit of ideas, right? So he's just like always trying to collect ideas because if you're not getting enough input of ideas, you can't kind of sort through those things and then let your brain mash them into a new idea that you can then apply in a particular situation.
Yeah. No, yeah, I know who John Acuff is. I've read a few of his books. It's good stuff. I really like that way of thinking. Definitely like for my blog, I'm constantly like I have an idea and I just jot it down. I've just got a whole list of them somewhere and like I go back and look over them and every so often I'm like, oh, that would be a good one to write about now or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
not
and
having
that's
that list
exactly the
would be
same.
really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have that bank of ideas, you don't have that thing to pull from when you need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I think about when I'm trying to learn new ideas and techniques that I think is important, I think sometimes people miss is trying to figure out like what problems they actually solve. Right? Because
Oh
like
yeah,
you look at like Google uses Kubernetes, right, or something, right? And like you get, and this is like outside of the LabVIEW world, but people are like, oh, well, if we need to be like Google, we need to use Kubernetes too, blah blah blah, right? But they don't understand like what problems it solves. Like in the LabVIEW world, it might be like PPLs or something, right? Everybody likes PPLs, so we should use PPLs. Okay, but
Right.
do you have a problem that it solves, or are you just using it just to use it? And that's not necessarily always bad, you know? Like you learn where it fits by going out and using it, but if you can understand the problems that it solves, then to your point, when you encounter that problem in your brain, you're like, okay, well, I remember learning about this and this solved that particular problem for that person over there. Maybe it'll work in my situation.
Exactly. And I find that, because I'm a more senior engineer at this point, right, when I'm talking to younger engineers, right, in our company or at clients, right, when I start telling them like, well, this is how I do something, right, and then I also talk to them about the why, right,
Hmm.
because then trying to transfer that experience that I've had, like, oh, well, because when you do this, that, or the other thing in LabVIEW, if I don't do it this way, I end up with a problem later on where I open myself up to having a problem. And so I, like to make sure that when I'm sharing this is the, I don't get my old curmudgeon voice out. This is the way you have to do it. I try to be like, this is what I do and this is why. And then you can decide to, and I also try to be that up front when I'm like, I do this just because this is the way I do it. Because
Yeah.
we all have those things too.
Yeah. Well, I've been toying with this idea for a while, and maybe you'll identify with this, but I feel like it kind of comes full circle. Like when you first start writing code, you do simple things because that's all you know. And then you go through this phase, and maybe this is your like, code must be really neat or whatever phase, but you go through this phase where you learn design patterns, you learn like the code must be really neat, and you like over index on that. And you just become like, I don't know, I say code Nazi or something, but like just like everything must be perfect, everything must be well designed, and we must use all the design patterns and we must use the latest and greatest. And then eventually I feel like you get this like pragmatic, just like you go back to like, okay, just keep it simple. Like, does that work? Okay, great. Let's move on.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the whole range of things. It's easy to, well, when when somebody asks me to solve a problem, right? Usually, what happens is my initial inclination is to come up with the most complicated and convoluted solution there is, and then through when I express that to somebody, right? They then we start the dialogue and the asking the questions, and then I start dialing back the like the complication to get back to what the simplest solution, so that, oh, okay, yeah, we could do it that way, and that would be that'd be way better. But usually I start with the most complicated, and then come to uh, come back to the simple.
Yeah, well, I feel like we like solving problems and then we get obsessed with the solution instead of the problem. So we're like all focused on like, oh, our solution should look like this and do that. And we start adding to it. And then we get to this point where we're like, oh, yeah, we didn't really need to do all of that.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of beginning engineers too tend to like think like or actually probably more like middling engineers, right? So beginning engineers don't know to like think ahead at all because I can't see what's coming. After you've done a few projects, you start to see like, oh, well, these last couple of projects required this, so let's build that in up front. And I feel like as I've gotten older and wiser, I've gotten better at changing code. And so I feel less pressure to try to get things right up front. So I'm much more like, yeah, they might want logging or this or that, but we can add that easily later. So let's hold off on that for the moment. I don't know if that
Yeah.
was
I mean, it usually comes down to what, thinking through what are the things that will the customer might want, and am I implementing things in a way that will prevent me from doing that easily in the future, right? And so uh, that's kind of when what I was talking about in this situation, and what I was talking about before. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he's got a quote that was hanging in an office that I moved into when I started a job once. That it really kind of speaks to this, and it's perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And so, I try and, you know, think about that and use that in my, uh, writing software, right? You want to make it as simple as possible, but also not make it so that you'll have to overcomplicate it when you have to come in and make an update in the future.
Yeah, I also feel like too, sometimes we struggle with removing or deleting code or removing features.
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know if that's like a personal attachment thing or it's just like we get rewarded more for adding things than removing them, or I'm not sure what that is, but I definitely, there's a reluctance to remove stuff. And it's always easier to just keep adding on.
yeah. I've been guilty of that where you take and you put a diagram disable structure around something. You're like, I did all this work on it. I don't want to throw it away. And then inevitably that ends up in, the final code, and yeah, it gets compiled out and it's not used, but it's still there cluttering up the diagram. So I'm trying to be better lately about once I've run the code, tested it with the new implementation that's, what the customer wants, that's going to get the job done, going back and actually deleting those things that don't need to be there, just so that I don't confuse myself or somebody else coming after. Because unless I've documented it, there's no chance that I'll remember what I was trying
Yeah.
to do with that 6 months from now. When the customer comes back and is like, "Hey, I need you to make another update," and I go in and I'm looking at the same code. Oh, well, why is that there? What am I doing? So, yeah, I hear you. Deleting code is sometimes a lot harder than just leaving it in there, but it's better in the long run, I think, to get rid of it.
Yeah, the LabVIEW IDE also doesn't help a whole lot because it's quite possible to like delete stuff from the IDE or from the project, and then somehow they still end up sticking around on disk, and next thing you know, they're like just floating around there.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's the thing that, yeah, I wish that it was when you deleted it, like if there was an option to delete it when you removed it from the project, that would be amazing.
yeah, I have to imagine it would not. I don't know. I have to imagine that's a possibility that they could add a flag that would do that, but I don't
I
know.
mean, they
Maybe we
already
just
have the dialogue that asks you, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Just put another checkbox that says, "And delete the thing from disk."
yeah, there you go. There you go,
Anybody
Elon.
from LabVIEW R&D listening, you can have that idea for free.
There you go.
Hey listeners, as we get into season 3, we are actively seeking sponsorships. This can be in the form of a Patreon membership or a traditional sponsorship. We do custom packages for anyone who's interested. Feel free to reach out to me at hello@thelabviewexperiment.com. You can also use the contact page on our website. Thanks!
Yeah. So you mentioned pair and mob programming. So we've done a couple sessions, right? We did one or two through the GID exchange through the thing that they're
Yep.
promoting, and then we did one at GDevCon. What were your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah. So I'm always a little bit hesitant on those things, like I said earlier, because it sounds like you're going to take, twice the resources to do one times the work. And, oh, it's probably also going to be slower because you're trying to talk. But actually, in our experiences, I usually learn something that I didn't know how to do before, right? So then you can, because it's actually crazy how many things I've taken from other people, seen them do something, even just shortcut or hotkeys, that I was like, oh, how did you do that? And then I learned a way that I can improve code, doing things faster. Um, but also just it ends up, I think you end up with a higher potential to get things correct the first time when you've got multiple people looking at it. And especially in the mob situation that we've done, where we've had 3 or 4 or 5 people that have been a part of it, where you can have that, somebody's implementing, somebody's driving, and then the rest of the people can be thinking about what code is going to be implemented, kind of watching out for any pitfalls, right? So that it can be talked about. And
Mhm.
and honestly, like I the session that we did at GDevCon, where it was just playing Baba Is You, is that the
Yeah.
game? That would, like, I think that's a really interesting and potentially fun way to introduce that concept, because I mean there were so many things that as you were watching other people do things, you would get ideas, or you would see a an implementation or an action being taken that wasn't immediately obvious to you, that then you're like, oh, and then, but sometimes you're also like, oh, this is what's obvious to me. And as people might get stuck trying to figure out what's going on, then you could, then it's like, hey, I can make a suggestion that will help. Uh,
Mhm.
and I, I think everybody had a good time. And if I'm trying to, in November, we have a few days where we just everybody's in the office, and we just do work internal to the company. So to clean up things and just hang out, just before Thanksgiving, when clients are sometimes there, sometimes not. And I'm really pushing for us to try and do a session or two of mob programming and use Baba is you, just to kind of introduce the concept, because I think it's it was super fun. And when you think about all the times that even with growing up, right, you watch somebody play Nintendo, you watch them go along and you're like, oh hey, you missed something, or go back and do that. Like all that type of information you can take in sometimes when you're not in the middle of doing something. And when you're actively programming, it's sometimes hard to step back and take a look at what's going on. And so I think all those things can help in mob programming.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about that one, but yeah, it is nice to be able to take a step back when you're not the driver or the navigator and just kind of look at the big picture and kind of see where everything sits. Because sometimes you can get way stuck deep in the code and you're like trying to just make decisions about this module or this particular VI or function or something, and you're not thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah. And especially because what happens if you've got, 4 or 5 people, is you're going to have people who have had time to sit back and think about it, come in and start implementing things, describing how to implement it, telling someone how to implement it. And, you know, so you'll end up with a better product because you see that. And it also teaches you to listen. Because you probably remember that, like the very first thing that we did in the very first time we did the mod programming, like I was the driver, which is supposed to be the person that is only programming, and Casey May, who's also in that session, was the talker. So he is supposed to be telling me what to do, and I completely, like I would say I half listened, because he told me to do something, and I like just went and I started doing things, and it was not what I was supposed to be doing. So it was like I had to stop and take a step back. It was pretty funny. It's pretty funny to look back and think, I really, it really teaches you to listen, so that you don't, you're not always getting in your head trying to overthink things. Let
Yeah.
somebody else who's thinking about it think about it, and they can give you those directions.
Yeah. No, yeah. The other interesting thing I thought of while we were talking is, you mentioned the perception that the mob and pair programming is slower, and I'm wondering. So a couple thoughts around that. I think we're just not aware. We don't pay attention enough to how we spend our time, and there's some misperceptions around that. Like,
I
for
agree with that.
example, there's a video by G. Paul Hill that maybe we can throw in the comments. He talks about, I think he calls it the lump of coding fallacy. And it's like we think when we're coding, we're always doing the same thing, but we're really not. Like sometimes we're reading the code, sometimes we're writing code, sometimes we're running the code to see what's happening. Sometimes we just like take a step back and we're like drawing on whiteboards or a piece of paper and doing design work. And we tend to lump all that together. And then when we start thinking about the different parts, it changes the way we think about it. And one of the things I've been thinking about, and you brought it up a little bit, is that when you have multiple people writing the code, you end up catching a lot of bugs and a lot of errors, and just kind of end up with higher quality code because you got more eyes on it. And I'm wondering, do you think that could replace doing code reviews at all, or would that be like, yeah,
That's an interesting thought. So I certainly think that it could replace code reviews that are done just to make sure that things are working right. I don't know if you could replace that in all of the regulated industries that might have regulations that require or procedures that require code review as part of the quality process. But like I've certainly been in my fair share of code reviews where as you're reviewing it, people identify, oh, you need to make this, that, or the other change. You just, check out or, and make the change right there, check it back in. And you said, this, we reviewed this new version and, call that good. So I think it could. I think it kind of depends, right? And whether or not you have to have an independent reviewer, because sometimes, like when I was at Boston Scientific, that was something that you had to do. You had the developer and you had to have an independent reviewer who hadn't worked on the code be a part of the review. So that's the long-winded way of saying it depends.
Okay.
But I think as a general, like, if for our company, if we're doing internal projects, it absolutely could replace code reviews where someone's just staring at the code trying to see if there's anything wrong, right? Where if you're having that more interactive session, that at the end of it, if everything runs and looks good, then you could consider that enough eyes looked at it, enough hands touched it, that it's probably good.
Yeah. That's definitely been my thinking. I haven't run into too many situations that actually require an independent review or anything like that. Mostly I'm just thinking for like our own internal purposes type of thing. But also too, like I find often when you're doing the code review, if you're doing it after the fact and you're doing it just for like your own internal reasons, it's really easy to blow off some of the findings and be like, okay, yeah, we should probably go change that, but it works. So like, and that's a lot of effort. So let's not go do that. And I feel like maybe with pair programming or mob programming, you would catch those things earlier when they're easier to fix, maybe, or maybe even before they happen.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I would agree with that.
Cool. So one of the other things I like to do is ask the question of tell me about an experiment that you tried that maybe didn't turn out the way you thought it would, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so I am so like we talked about before, I'm a hardware guy generally. I never thought that I was going to be a programmer. So like I do not have a lot of formal programming training. So I didn't have a lot of frameworks or those kinds of things in my early development. And so one of the companies that I worked for, one of the guys that sat next to me, he did most of the hardware layout. So like the instrumentation, like doing the drawings for the, the hardware connections to the different sensors and stuff to the LabVIEW modules or to the NI CDAC or CRIO modules. And but he had come from the PLC world primarily. And one day we started talking, and he was like, "Oh, we should try using this framework or this paradigm that we use in the PLC world." And it was based on state machines. And really what it amounted to was like, each state would be its own code module. And then that might have some states in between it, like you might go through and do a bunch of steps. But ultimately, you would do that, and then when you changed states in the application, you would move to a different code module. And and I was like, it sounded interesting, right? This goes back to I'm willing to try anything. So we started I started implementing it and got quite a ways down the path. Even got to kind of a full implementation on a system, and it it just did not work. Like it was because it wasn't maintaining state. It wasn't like maintaining state variables or anything between the different states. It was just not good. And so uh, I think they ended up scrapping all that code at some point because it was a when the users would use it, like you do all your setup on one screen and then you'd hit go, and then like that screen would go away and a new screen would come back and to do all the running of the code. And then if you needed to change something, you had to shut all that stuff down and go back to the outside. It was not good. And so when that's when I started to get more into figuring out frameworks, or at least like I think at NI week that year, because it was like 2016 ish, 2015, 2016. I went to when I went to NI week, I got to went to a couple of talks that were based on frameworks and architecture and thinking through those things. And I'm certainly glad that there are other people out there who have thought through a lot of the frameworks, because at at my heart, I'm a hardware guy who does programming because you need to do that in order to make the whole system work. Uh, so I think of myself more of as a systems guy, and I just end up doing more software because that's where you end up implementing a lot of things for a system. But that was definitely a learning experience for, give something a try and maybe implement it a little bit. And there were indications that it wasn't going to work out about halfway through, and I just ignored those and was like, nope, we just got to plow on because we got a date to make and a budget and all those things. And yeah, I should have given up and gone to something more standard way before I did.
That's something I always struggle with is when am I being stubborn and when am I being persistent? Right? Because sometimes you try something and like if it doesn't work out at first, maybe you should try it a little bit longer and for some time period just to see like versus like, quit at like the first sign that there's trouble. But then again, there's also like beating your head against the wall and trying to make something work that's never gonna work.
Yeah, I feel like finding the happy middle between those two extremes is really hard,
Yeah.
because it's real easy to get in our mind like, oh no, you just got to beat your head against the wall and eventually you'll find a way to solve the problem, right? Because I've certainly seen that happen to me before, right? Like you just beat your head, but like you try this way, then you go this way, and you attack it from all the different angles, and eventually you find one. And then it also doesn't help that I don't know what the kids are hearing these days, but I certainly, like you didn't want to be labeled a quitter growing up. Like, you didn't want to, you didn't, there was none of this fail fast type of talk when I was growing up. And so, the like try it and like, finding that happy medium for, yeah, I've tried enough things. This isn't going to work. We need to, rethink it and go back to it is certainly a hard thing to do. And I still have not found that. And I actually tend to err on the side of beating my head against the brick wall.
Yeah, I'm definitely that type of person too. So yeah.
But that just allows us to be able to say that we're persistent, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's like something like your greatest asset is also your greatest liability or something.
Oh, for sure, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you get that, in interviews when they ask, oh, what's your greatest, what's your greatest weakness, whatever. And you try and say something like, I'm a perfectionist. And like that might be true. And that just is, you
Yeah.
just need to reframe your mind to not let that get in the way. But
Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely true. So out of all that, you mentioned the frameworks discussion. Did you guys settle on a framework or did you create your own or where did you end up on that whole
so
discussion?
Yeah, so we've created our own. I've actually tried to get I'm trying to get Will to say that he should present on it at GDevCon NA sometime. But it kind of came out of, so Will being the more software oriented member of the team and owner of the company, right? He I've used DQMH. I haven't done any active framework projects just because none of our clients have, like when I'm brought in to change something, it's never, it's never an active framework kind of thing. Um, but so, Will had some things that he doesn't like or thinks could be better about, the different frameworks. And so we were at when we were at, I think it was 2016, maybe, yeah, 2016, NI week. We listened to Rob Humfeld. I think he's from Jet Engineering. He did a talk where he was talking about the model view controller, and it was a really framework or concept that Will and I had not heard about or had not had a lot of experience with. And so we listened to Rob and talk about it, and then we came back up to St. Paul and did a lot of thinking about it and kind of working through. And so we've kind of got our own. Actually, we've got two flavors of our internal framework, but they're both based on the model view controller, but we call them actor-oriented model view controllers. And one of them is non-object oriented based, and we often do that because most of the clients that we have in the area, if they're going to support something themselves, they're not doing a lot of object oriented, so it's an easier entry point for them to be able to maintain their own code, because we don't want to like implement something that they can only come back to us and to understand and implement. And so depending on what the client is going to do with it, or what the final deployment is, we'll either use the non object oriented version or the object oriented version of it. And really it's just about messaging and how we let our individual processes be independent of each other, but still have that requirement and reliance on messages from other modules. So I don't want to get too much into the details because that's Will's bailiwick. You should contact him and try and get him on to talk about it.
Yeah, he is on my list. So if you're listening, Will, I'm sure he'll listen at some point.
Hopefully he'll listen to this one. He's been super busy lately, but hopefully things are gonna settle down for him. And,
that's good.
He can have time to think about it and get on the podcast.
Yeah, cool. So do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the GID exchange and how that's all shaping up?
Yeah, so for those that were at, well, I don't know when this episode is going to air, so I don't know if we'll have started by now or if we'll have be going on, or if it will be in the future. But as I think you've talked to just about everybody on the GID exchange committee so far, Jesper and Casey, and I think Erich Stack's the only one you maybe haven't talked to yet.
Yep.
But as we've talked about, I mean, I think it's been 2 or 2.5 years that the committee's been going, and we've really been trying to figure out what our place in G Central, how we be part of that, and what we can do to help the LabVIEW community. And the open source and trying to facilitate some of those things is really is what we want to do. But figuring out how we can help implement some solutions has been tricky, because we started out trying to help raise money, and that just wasn't gonna be a good thing. And now we're trying to figure out how we can bring more people or get more open source projects either started or run through. And so what we're going to do here, what Casey, if you watch his 7x7 presentation on the GDevCon NA YouTube channel, talked about that we're actually going to try and host some mod programming sessions where we pick a project. And I think it's either going to be working on your Blue project or doing some work on the icon editor.
Okay, cool.
Those are the two things that we've bounced around, but we want to try and set up some sessions where we can, one, introduce people to mod programming and kind of bring them in, but also like do what we can to get people experience contributing to open source so that they can then go on and continue doing that on their own, or that we'll continue to help host. And the idea is that the first couple we would do would be smaller, right? To just kind of get our feet wet, kind of get a rhythm of how we go about running these sessions. And then as we get, as more and more people, hopefully we can get more and more people involved. And then if we do that, right, maybe there's people who show up and they have an open source project that they would like help contributing, to, that they can, say we get 15, 20 people in a session where people can split off into groups of 4, 5, 6, something that makes sense, and work on and make progress on a number of different projects. So the idea, we're going to shoot for October 2024. I think the second week is when we're going to try and do our first one, but we haven't figured that out, and I'm going to be putting a poll up shortly on the Discord, the LabVIEW Discord, to see what people might be interested in, like what times are going to work, because you kind of start to get in that question of, do you do it after work? Do you do it during work? Like, how do you get the people involved, because everybody's at different life stages and in different time zones, and how do you make it so that the most people can participate? So that's what we're really trying to do. We're just feeling our way through things, trying to do the best that we can. If anybody has ideas for us, things that we can do better, suggestions, we're happy to listen to those, especially if you're willing to help us implement.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to hear that, because I've been very much advocating for something like that for a while. So I think it'll be good. It'll be good for the community. I feel like we have a fair amount of open source projects, but I don't feel like there's that much of an open source. Like, I'm not sure how many people are actually contributing to like some of the JKI stuff that's out there, or like the Dr. Powell stuff and things like that. I kind of feel like a lot of those are like maintained by one person or one company, and not really maintained by the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, and to be fair, I think that's fine, because I think there's some people who do it as marketing, right? And that's
no, I mean,
and
that's totally fine.
We use plenty of those packages.
Yep.
But a lot of them have been fully formed for quite some time, and there's not necessarily a ton of new features. Oftentimes it's just, we need to update to a new version of LabVIEW or something. But that's actually, I'm excited for, I haven't installed it yet, but I'm excited for LabVIEW 2024 Q3 to have that option to save for older versions of LabVIEW and be able to do everything in one programming environment, so that it might actually be easier for people to contribute to open source projects. Because you can have your one environment installed and then program in your IDE, and then when it gets checked back in, it can be tested and built however it needs to be to go forward. And so you might be able to have somebody a maintainer you don't have to have this, like somebody can contribute even if they don't have or can't have a particular version of LabVIEW installed just because of where their licensing is or what their, if they can't use the community edition,
Mhm.
right, for whatever, or if the project is maintained in a version of LabVIEW that's prior to the community edition, right?
Yep.
That's the thing that I think is hopefully going to open up more people getting involved. And then really what that means is I need to get more involved and, contribute to do more than one mod programming session to contribute to one piece of open source library.
Cool. No, that's all really good. So thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk. I've quite enjoyed it. It's good.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and thanks for all your work with the GID exchange. I'm super excited about that. So
Absolutely. I said we're just trying to do what we can.
all right, thank you. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.